This is Duke University.
To the Abecedarian child care, sick. Okay, there was a clinic there. They'd take care of them. Okay, so really comprehensive care. They received an intervention that was really developing as they did it. But the goal they had in mind was to enhance the cognitive development of children who participated in the study. So the idea was there was this mismatch, this effect where children who lived in poverty had lower IQs. And the developers of the Abecedarian thought that those IQs weren't just about genetics, that in fact you could modify children's cognitive ability with the right environmental supports. And that's what the Abecedarians set out to do. Regardless of all the kinds of things that have been found, which have been rich and wonderful, the fact of the matter was they were trying to help children be a little bit smarter, even in the context of poverty. That was the goal. And they did. Starting at about 15 months of age and on through the school years, Abecedarians outperformed their controls in assessments of education, of achievement, and of cognitive development. And you hear this more often, you'll hear it a couple more times today and in the news a lot, they had fewer referrals for special education. Less of the Abecedarians ended up needing special education services than their non-participating peers. They had higher educational attainment. At 21, only 40% of the controls were either enrolled in college or were in skilled workforce, compared to 70% of the Abecedarians. But this graph shows that at 30 years of age, 4 times the number of Abecedarians had completed a college degree than those who had not participated in the child care. Now, you'll see that still most of them didn't have college degrees, so it didn't transform it such that it leveled the playing ground, but it did make a real difference, 4 times as many. At 21 and at 30 years of age, the women who had participated in the Abecedarian study reported less depression than their control peers. And we've heard about these physical effects for men. At 35 years of age, a quarter of the controls had developed metabolic disorder. So they had high blood pressure, they were pre-diabetic or diabetic. Of the controls, none of them had developed metabolic disorder. So a long-term health outcome, very disconnected from enhancing young children's academic achievement and cognitive development. Maybe? Finally, a benefit that hasn't been talked about as often is the benefits of the Abecedarian for families. When the participants were 4.5 years old, the Abecedarian mothers were more likely to have finished high school, were more likely to be engaged in post-secondary training, were more likely to be self-supporting, and had delayed having more children, had fewer children. So there were real effects for the parents. Well, their children had high quality, full day, year-round care and education. It didn't just make a difference for the children participants, it made a difference for the families. This is really important, and I think really not as an important point that's not as emphasized. So the question is, how did the Abecedarian make a difference? What kinds of things were done to impact this? Well, I mentioned that it was comprehensive. Nutrition, health care, rides to the program. Whatever was needed to have them be present was done. So there was a high level of presence in the program on the part of the children. But also, there was a set of processes they put in place that later they called learning games, in which an adult and a child, sometimes an adult and 2 children as they got older, interacted intensively with linguistic interactions that were designed to teach a concept or teach some part of language. These language interactions were intense, frequent because they had enough adults per child, And they really didn't know how these were going to make a difference. There just was an idea that this was going to move the needle, that what children needed was these interactions. Now, there's been a lot written about what made a difference in the abecedarian and a lot speculated. And the fact of the matter is we'll never know for sure exactly what processes can be implicated. However, we've assessed, I say we, that's broadly, the researchers, have assessed that maybe it's these social emotional characteristics that have been talked about a lot, that maybe these characteristics of learning and approaches to learning, maybe those are what's made a difference. But in analyzing the data over what made a difference for the educational attainment and the educational and cognitive achievement, what comes up over and over again is children's verbal skills and children's cognitive skills. The abecedarian study shifted children's verbal skills and cognitive skills, thereby shifting other things for a long time. So, that's what we know. This was in the 1970s. We've learned a lot since then. There's things we know that we didn't know, for example, about brain development, that we know now. And when I was amazed when I was thinking we're 16 years into this neurons to neighborhoods expansion of our understanding about the brain, and it continues to expand. But in the 1970s, it was that. We weren't sure what we were shifting. We weren't sure what was being moved. There were just these guesses about what happens. Now we know this. We know that the structure of the brain early on is incredibly important to children's developing and learning. Specifically, we know that the right side of the brain, which develops very quickly in those first few years, has a tendency to really favor knowledge about emotions and really love pattern learning. And we know that that frontal lobe of the brain develops very slowly and only with lots of help, lots of more sophisticated help. And so we know these things about the structure of the brain that make a difference for how we can teach young children. We know about neural plasticity and neural development. So while the neurons that we're going to get are in our brain and present when we're born, the connections between them continue to expand rather willy-nilly for the first few years, and then after that start to prune in response to experiences. This has both positive and negative implications. Negative being if children are exposed to a lot of negative experiences, the plasticity will favor their learning of those negative experiences and patterns. On the other hand, if children are exposed to positive and productive and promotive experiences, that's going to shift their learning in the favor of positive experiences. And finally, stress and cortisol. We know stress is good. It helps keep us alive. We know that large amounts of it impair learning and development. Literally impair the growth of children, literally impairs their ability to use their cognitive capacities and learn. And so we know that managing that traumatic stress, managing that cortisol levels in young children is extremely important. So this is knowledge that we have, and so how are we using this to move forward? The key process that's come out of neurons to neighborhoods, that's come out of our growing and continuing understanding of brain development, boils down to probably what is the single most important human process we have: serve and return. The most essential interaction between two individuals that promotes language development, learning development, social emotional development, the whole package. And it's as simple as, "Hello, sweet baby, are you ready to play?" And the baby's very sophisticated answer, "Ga." And of course, what's fantastic is we know half of the time, actually more than half of the time, the "ga" comes before, "Hello, sweet baby, are you ready to play?" The children learn so fast that they learn to initiate these serves and returns so that the adult can be pulled into the interaction. Single most important thing. And we know, because of this wonderful learning about the brain and developmental science, we've started to learn what a healthy child is. We know what a healthy child looks like. We know what a healthy child needs. We know how they develop. It's knowledge that we have. And we've based our materials on it for teaching and learning. We know children need to be physically healthy. They need to have both access to good health and physical development and learn about it themselves. They need to regulate emotion and be supported in doing so and have warm, productive relationships. They need to communicate effectively. It may be in long, long times ago that communication, high, sophisticated levels of it, wasn't very important to health and well-being. Those days are gone. The ability to communicate effectively and precisely and with a wide variety of individuals is an essential characteristic of development. Children need to learn how to solve problems, one way to boil down cognitive development, and we know that children are healthy when they explore with curiosity, attentiveness, and persistence, most commonly in the context of play. So we know what a healthy child looks like. We are so smart. We know lots of stuff. So how are we using it? What's working with what we're doing now? And I'm going to take just one quick moment to point out that this teacher is having a much better time than Lady Bird Johnson with her engagement of her readers. Maybe we've made some headway there. The first thing I want to point out is the value of our understanding and increased understanding of family strengthening approaches. Matter of fact, we've got burgeoning family strengthening approaches. And in particular, home visiting is one that's turning out to be very, very important, very valuable, very cost-effective. And I was remembering someone was asking me a question today about program that I had worked in, and I explained that I had done home visiting in my first job as an early intervention teacher. We visited families' homes every Friday. And I will tell you that to this day, I have no idea how they let me into their homes a second time because I had no idea what I was doing. The only thing I knew to do is to develop good relationships with them and try to help them solve their problems. I'd like to tell you that would show up in a research study as highly effective, but I'm sure it would not. There was a lot we needed to know. We know that home visiting programs done well enhance school readiness. They enhance parenting skills, especially related to understanding children's development and supporting their development in the context of challenging behavior. We know that good home visiting programs done to fidelity help children's health and development. We know that it helps family self-sufficiency. I think this is when home visiting programs can really rise, when they're able to really support families' ability to take care of themselves socially, psychologically, and economically. Good home visiting programs connect families to needed services. They assess and put families in touch with what they need to be well. And mental health services. They are a frontline program in identifying and supporting mothers with postpartum depression. The next thing we know that we're doing pretty well, most of the time, is developing program quality policies and standards. We know what high quality programs for young children look like. And we have some super cool tools to assess that's happening. We have tools that tell us how a classroom's looking. How quality is it for young children? That when used at their best are used to help programs and professionals enhance their quality of care and education. Every time I talk about these tools, I have this little thing that sounds like Darth Vader in the back of my head, though, that goes, use for the force of good. Yeah. So it's super important not to let the tools run us, but to use these tools to enhance our programs. But the bottom line is, we know in terms of structure, ratios, class size, materials available. We know in terms of processes, emotion support, organizational climate, instructional support. We know what structure and processes are needed for high quality early care and education programs. We know what it looks like. That's enormous. And we have foundations and standards that tell us what we're supposed to be looking for with young children. We have our standards in North Carolina are being used by several other states as an exemplar for what it looks like, what we should look for in children's health, education, and well-being. We have Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework that is doing similar kinds of looking at the same domains. What does it mean? The slide I had before that looked at what it means to be a healthy and well-educated child. And we have an understanding of what kinds of supports and services and characteristics we will see when children are mentally healthy and well. And we even have some documents that say what practitioners can do to make this happen. We're getting there. So, and this is the DEC recommended practices, which says, here's how you create the optimal environments and processes to care for young children with disabilities and their families. So we've developed a lot of products, and this is how many products could I put up there, folks? Like 100 million. So if your product's not up there, please forgive me. But we have developed a lot of products that substantially account for what we know children need to look like to be healthy and well, and how to get there with our programs. We have federal programs, Head Start and Early Head Start, that work. When done well, when done to fidelity, when incorporating all the aspects of their programs, are solid, good programs that support children's learning development and families. A beautiful thing about Head Start and Early Head Start is that they are comprehensive programs, really grounded in a public health perspective of what it means to be well, really grounded in family strength and well-being, grounded in health and nutrition and mental health, okay? Things that sometimes our schools aren't as engaged in the educational model. And so I really, as we move into thinking about the preschool programs and thinking about the future, I really want to encourage people that we not lose this comprehensive public health perspective. It's an incredibly important part of early care and education, and what early care and education has brought to the table for all this time, and what the Abecedarian developers understood. So, there have been some studies that have said, no, Head Start didn't work so well, not too impressive, and they've reevaluated the Head Start Impact Study and found that, in fact, you're right. When the program was not delivered with quality, it didn't produce those great effects for kids and families. When it was produced with quality, we started to see those effects for children and families. Heckman did an analysis of the Head Start Impact Study and found some other things that are worth noting that Head Start and Early Head Start produced. So he saw reduced obesity at 12 and 13 years old among children who received Head Start services, and reduced obesity and depression at 16 and 17, these aren't nothing, and reduced crime at 20 and 21. Not the things we're usually looking for. We really like looking for third grade reading, but, and that's important. But there's so many other things that are impacts, and those, interestingly, align with some of the findings we found from Abecedarian, from the Perry Preschool Project, and Chicago Parent-Child Centers. So we have public or state pre-K, running often separate, sometimes mixed with our federal programs of Head Start. It can be for 3 and 4 or 4-year-olds. It can be part or full day. It can have an education focus only or some health focus. In general, these state pre-K programs increase children's readiness for kindergarten, especially in math and literacy. They also typically increase some teacher perceptions of social emotional development, and they decrease the need for special education in studies where we look just at the pre-K participants and in population-based studies. Decreasing the need for special education isn't nothing. In addition to being an enormous economic investment, it also addresses some disparities in how special education placements are made. And the degree to which we can identify children's needs early on and address them before they develop the behavior problem or the learning disability that has them relegated to special educational services is an interest, because we want special education services to be for children who need them the most and who despite early opportunity, still have need for extra intervention. So it brings us to North Carolina's pre-K and More at 4 program. And I wanted to just put it out there because there have been in the news some reports of pre-K not working as well, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do here in North Carolina. Many of you probably know this, but just to put it in perspective. Our North Carolina PreK is state funded. It's for 4-year-olds only. We currently have roughly 30,000 children in this program and 2,000 classrooms. It can be run by the local educational administrator or it can be run by Smart Start. We have a variety of site types. They happen in private child care programs, in public schools, in Head Start programs. It is typically, though, school day, school year, so a 6-hour program. It is during just the school year, so September to June. So we're already seeing that it's meeting, it's very, not only is it targeted toward an age group and toward an income level, it's targeted toward some very specific narrow outcomes that don't include families, right, that aren't including health necessarily, though there's certainly a nutrition component. We have standards, and the standards are high. And the standards, when Head Start and NC-PreK were first integrated into blended funding streams in classrooms, there was a lot of mismatch between how those were delivered. There is a movement toward having those high quality standards agreed upon and shared across those two programs. A place that PreK in North Carolina gets it right and does well is an emphasis on high quality curriculum, an emphasis on assessment and use of data, and screening as another source of data. So really focusing on using data to inform and improve programs. I failed to mention in standards that in North Carolina, our ratios are 1 to 9, so 2 teachers to 18 children. This might not seem to make a difference compared to classrooms that other states are doing where there are 2 teachers to 20. But if any of you have ever worked here in a classroom, you know the difference between 18 and 20. Yeah, so there's a big quality difference. It feels like there shouldn't be if you're just picking numbers, but there's a big difference. Ratios make a difference. Every child to attend and care for in a group setting makes a very big difference in the care responsible, that the adult is responsible for. Our program is targeted toward low income, children from low income families, and also targeted toward children who have special needs or special circumstances. So what have we moved? North Carolina, PreK, more at 4, previous name, has moved the needle on teacher credentials. I want you to take a peek at this because this is really impressive. So in 2003, 2004, the year after the program started, 40% of all teachers, PreK teachers, had a BK license. Now, 84% have a BK license. In 2003, 2004, 34% of all PreK teachers had no credentials at all. Now only 10% do. So we have really raised the bar. A great thing about the NC-PreK story is with that bar raising, NC-PreK teachers are paid a public school salary. And so this is one of the relatively rare areas in which increased demands for competence and credentials has been close to matched with the financial reward. There's also longitudinal outcomes. Between PreK and kindergarten, participants in the North Carolina PreK program significantly increase their vocabulary, that's receptive vocabulary, and applied math skills over the course of time. So it's effective in increasing those academic skills. And here's this verbal skills again. The strongest predictor of child outcomes is their level of English proficiency. For children who are English language learners and children, or dual language learners and children who are English native speakers, their skills improve from PreK to spring best when they have when they start with the lowest level. So the greatest gains are for the children with the lowest levels of English proficiency. But we still see gains for the children at the highest level. I was going to talk about this Tennessee problem. I don't know if I want to. I don't think we know the bottom line yet. There have been a lot of discussions and a lot written already on why Tennessee's PreK not only didn't get great effects by kindergarten, but by 3rd grade the controls were doing better. It was on a few measures, by the way, not on their entire battery of measures. And their measure of dosage was quite limited, so children had to have attended 20 days of pre-K to be counted as having gotten the pre-K intervention. They had a 1 to 20 ratio. That's why I brought up ratio earlier on. Or 2 to 20 ratio, excuse me. 2 teachers, 20 kids. Yeah, I really scared the room. Yeah, 2 to 20 ratio, 1 to 10. And there's been a lot of discussion about when they went to scale if the quality of the program remained tight. I think it'll be a while before we know, but the bottom line is it's one study. And pre-K studies have been done all over the country with mixed success. But as I said, in general, they raise children's academic achievement, raise their math and literacy skills. And our programs, we can say, work. So is pre-K necessary? Probably. Is it sufficient? Probably not. We need to consider the program in social economic contexts in pre-K and beyond. Part of the reason NC pre-K works as well as it does, its legacy of More at 4, it is a program that has been well supported from its inception, with some fluctuations here and there, but there's a strong societal support for North Carolina's pre-K, and that's part of the reason it has the success it has. We need to consider the quality of the program. You know, programs don't work, quality programs work, and keeping a focus on that in our studies. And then, should we hold pre-K accountable for long-term effects? I mean, we get them, cool, but should we really? I mean, should that experience you had in a 1 year of pre-K, should we really say, oh, don't need to worry about their graduation from high school now, right? Mm-hmm. We don't hold any other experiences after early childhood to that threshold. We don't say, you did well in 5th grade, you're going to have a great job. No. We don't apply that standard to other things. And so while it's great for us to study it, at some point we're going to have to say, basta, enough. Okay? Enough, yes, it works. It works when it's done well. Let's do it well. Now let's study some other things. Okay? That's my 2 cents. Okay. Jim Intervenor says, high quality is the minimum necessary to reliably increase children's school readiness, the minimum necessary. Use low-quality interventions, don't expect any effects. High quality is the minimum. No quality is too high. We've tested threshold effects. We don't know of the highest possible quality early childhood experiences a child can have. We don't know those yet. So, we have some early childhood programs that have potential and have some demonstrated transformation. So what does it take? What does it take to put these programs together? I'm going to suggest it takes families, it takes relationships, interactions, instruction, program support, and well, professionals, and I'm going to talk about some of those. Something I've always been really proud of in early childhood is our dedication and the centrality of families to our work. I think it's something we have done well a lot of the time when we're focusing on it, and something we need to keep in our focus going forward. So families need to be supportive. We need them to take care of their children in ways that enhance learning and development so we can do our part of our gig. We need them to be supportive or to get them to be supportive. But in order to do that, we need them to be supported. We need to find ways to support families in the work that they do in the raising of their young children. And that's a task that as well as we can craft out what early childhood programs, high quality, look like, I think we're still struggling a little bit with what the healthy family looks like. We get peeks at it and we start to work toward that and something gets elusive. And so I think we need to keep that, especially in early childhood programs where we work with families. One of the biggest problems reported in Head Start and early Head Start programs is they have a big family engagement component and they have trouble getting families in the door sometimes. And so it's hard to shift the needle on families if you aren't getting them in the door. So we have a lot to learn here, and it's something we need. The next is interactions. They need to be frequent, mostly warm, and one-on-one as often as we can have them, and they need to be language rich. 30 million words, yada, yada, yada. The fact of the matter is they need to be frequent, one-on-one, warm, and language rich. This is something the abecedarians stumbled on. It remains one of the key processes by which we evaluate quality of early childhood programs and that helps young children develop and learn. This is a place we haven't always been very good in early childhood. Instruction. No messing around. Instruction needs to be good. It needs to be challenging. It needs to be focused on child's interest just because you can, right? Okay? It needs to focus on child. It needs to be data-based. We need to keep data about what children know, what they're learning, and what we need them to learn next. When I talk about this with practitioners, I bring back Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. I said we need to be working in that space where children can do things with our help. Conversations. Okay? I had the privilege last week of having lunch with Lillian Katz. You may know Lillian Katz is a bit of the godmother of modern early childhood education. And she talked a lot about these contingent responsivities when she heard me talk about interactions and instruction. Lillian thinks that every interaction with a child should have a piece of instruction in it. Why not? We're the grown-ups, right? We're the grown-ups. We can ask those hard questions. It doesn't need to be, some people hear play, and they hear play, just go play, just experiment and run wild. No, no, no. Play should be promotive and growing understanding. So we have this instruction, we have these interactions, and we have, once again, serve and return, which if we want, we can call continuous contingent responsivity. It was Francis told me the other day that this was an idea Craig Ramey had, that there was this contingent responsivity, which if we pulled children into it, we could enhance their level of learning and language development. So Lillian, Craig Ramey, all in the same place. All boils down to this serve and return. So you're seeing, it almost makes it sound simple, right? We need to really shift the needle on one thing. We need to shift it at home. We need to shift it in programs. We need to shift it in all of our interactions. If it were easy, I suppose we'd shift it by now. So I want to talk a little bit about some things we're on the edge of, some promising approaches that I think are worth going into more. They involve families, they involve policies and programs, and they involve systems as support structures. The first is family strengthening. I think it would be wise of us to go beyond targeted home visiting, and by targeted I mean home visiting just for families who live in poverty. I don't know of a parent who wouldn't have really welcomed a visit from a nurse who knew something a week after your baby was born. As a matter of fact, most industrialized nations have some sort of program that allows access of expertise to a new parent. We have other kinds of programs that we really need to explore and investigate. And as I said, when I was exploring family programs, it can be a little overwhelming because programs have developed a lot in different kinds of programs. And I hesitate to say we need new ones. I think we need to align the programs we have and integrate them into the programs that we have. Reach Out and Read, Parents as Teachers, Incredible Years, Triple P, PCIT, we could keep going on. We have programs that work. What we haven't done is brought them to scale, made them accessible to the families who need them in response to a proper assessment of their need. Right? That's a trick. If we could assess families as well as we assess classrooms and children, we'd be really doing well. One of the ways we could do this is use data to connect families. And one of the models I'm familiar with is the early intervention model. This was developed by Dathan Rush and Melissa Sheldon, who have a way for the family service visitor, the early intervention professional who works with families whose children have disabilities or are at risk for disabilities. And they have one of these for several different kinds of conversations. So they do an assessment with a parent, see what their needs are, and then they have a roadmap in response to the, I need more education. Kind of, folks who are trained in motivational interviewing might recognize this. They developed it with their coaching. But what we need is we need ways for professionals who work with families to know how to have those conversations. Now you may say, oh, a trained nurse visitor absolutely has those skills. But what about all the other folks that visit programs and visit families and work with families? What about the child care teacher in the classroom who needs to have some conversations that are difficult, that are promotive for the child and the family? So, just a tool. So the economic story. Part of me finds these economic stories really exciting. And the other part of me says, really? Do we have to keep justifying this? But let's do it a little bit. James Heckman thinks about early childhood education as an investment in productivity and societal savings. It's a way to create competencies in individuals that will require them to depend less on governmental structures in the future. He says that early intervention lowers the cost of later societal investments. He also talks about skill begetting skills. Start early and you build this snowball of learning, motivation, and mastery that carries on through the lifetime. And he also says that starting earlier is better, and there's no too early. Timothy Bartok, an economist with Upjohn, uses a slightly different approach. And Timothy Bartok looks at high-quality early care and education programs and the degree to which they're associated with increased earnings for the participants. So his algorithm looks at test scores. So here he is using test scores in a really nice way. And uses test scores to examine the correlations of test scores early on with earnings later on in life. And he finds that in addition to increasing the earnings, and it varies, he calculates it, by the way, by program. Okay, so different programs have different earnings potentials. He also cited increased productivity as one of the benefits of early care and education. He cited parental earnings increase as a result of having access to certain kinds of programs, for example, high-quality early care and education. And he also noted community spillover benefits. This is where it starts to sound like voodoo economics to me, but honestly, most economics sounds like voodoo to me. But he notes that when geographical entities have larger amounts of high-quality early care and education, that the entire community's earnings over time increase. Now, part of that makes sense, right? People can go to work and do well in their jobs because they have high-quality early childhood programs for their children. So part of it makes sense, but part of it also is a little hard to believe. He documents it. So they each have slightly different recommendations for how we should implement an early care and education services in this country. Heckman's focus is on disadvantaged children 0 to 5 years. His emphasis is on not just focusing on cognitive development, but on social-emotional development. He really thinks social-emotional skills learned early on is the wedge through which other skills develop. He believes we need to provide parenting support, doesn't talk about that a lot, but thinks it's important, and emphasizes that we need programs that collect and analyze data. We still need to prove to ourselves, use that data for ourselves to continually improve and use it to show the effectiveness of our programs. Bartok thinks preschool is a great bang for your buck. He thinks preschool, for 4-year-olds at least, 3 and 4-year-olds ideal, should be universal because the effects to the participants are high and the spillover effects to the entire community are high as well. Preschool, good quality preschool, and he emphasizes high quality all the time and uses the programs I've just discussed as the markers. High quality preschool raises the bar for the entire community. Preschool for all, right? But he also thinks that we need high quality programs, 0 to 5 programs for low income families, specifically infant and toddler care and education starting as early as possible, and home visiting programs that offer benefits to families. He thinks that in terms of those two kinds of programs, that the people who need them the most need to have the most benefit because he sees them as expensive. And so he's weighing a cost to benefit. There's another model on the horizon. Who in the room has heard of pay for success? Okay, so yeah, okay. And speaking of something that sounds voodoo to me and dangerous, but again, it's on the horizon for a way we might think about certain programs and their benefits and their costs. So in pay for success model, investor, some entity, maybe a private funder, fronts capital to implement a program that is proven, cost-effective, and implementable. Okay? The government pitches in its part too and contracts to pay only agreed upon measurable results. They want to see these outcomes. The service delivery person delivers that program, measures just those things, well, at least for the funder, measures just those things that they're supposed to move, and then an impartial evaluator assesses whether the results are achieved. The idea is that for some of these programs, actual monetary savings can cross hands. It sounds like it might be hard to do for most programs, but I thought about the finding for home visiting reducing emergency room visits. That's an expense the savings you experience darn fast, and it's been a really difficult needle to move. So what if hospitals were able to reimburse to Medicare the dollars that were saved with emergency room visits? I don't know, just an idea. So this might work somewhere. I'm not sold. I'm just the messenger on this one, and so I just think it's interesting, and people should be aware. You're going to hear more of it, and so it's worth thinking and learning more about. So we have some high-quality programs, and we have some high-quality programs that really haven't been fully utilized yet. And one of them that I'd like to talk just for a couple minutes about, because both Heckman and Bartok also talk about Educare as a model that we want to look at for adopting, for early care and education for children 0 to 5, especially those who live in poverty. Educare is early Head Start, ramped up a bit. So ratios are slightly better, teacher-to-child ratios are slightly better in Educare classrooms. They rely more heavily on data use, data collection and use. So does Head Start and Early Head Start. Educare has been more vigilant about incorporating those systems of data management in their care and education. They construct a system of intensive family engagement that they also have trouble getting families to attend. But it's a very central part of their work. And they're looking very carefully at parent and family outcomes and achievement in kindergarten readiness. So some things I think it has to offer is that it takes this system of care from 0 to 5. And I think that has value in not splitting our systems. In early childhood, we've split our systems as many ways as you can cut a cookie. But I think we need to think about taking these systems and aligning them so that we have a 0 to 5 seamless care. Another thing that I think is valuable is thinking about using blending funded sources for Early Head Start. So right now, Early Head Start uses funding from Early Head Start and also from child care if they're savvy and connect with the child care services in their area, okay? It makes sense to think about including, for example, state funds, private funds, and other funders in an infant and toddler model. And a finding from Educare. Once again, these verbal skills. So children who enter Educare earlier and stay longer have better language skills, and the results are more remarkable for dual language learners. Now, do they remediate? So at the end, do they remediate? Do they totally close the gap? No. But the children with the least skills to start make the most gains, but they're still far below their peers. And these are the dual language learners who don't enter till 4. These guys here, Entered at 2. Doing better? Starting earlier and staying longer. I really like these programs that are pushing our comfort zone with infant and toddler care and education. I like that we have these successful models beginning with the Abecedarian and coming through today to Educare and Early Head Start that start to get us to think about that well done, to fidelity, group care for infants and toddlers can be transformative. Can change children's lives, can change families' lives. I have a 23-year-old who started in childcare at 5 weeks old. I didn't put her in this, but you can call her. She's okay. I might not have picked it, and I darn could have used that home visiting nurse. But it's not bad for families. We need professionals who are well. There's kind of a movement around making sure the professionals who do the early care and education with our children and families are well, and I'm really happy for it, especially since it followed a big movement to get them all 4-year degrees or 2-year degrees, licensure, accreditation, professional development in about 20 different areas, and skill sets to work with every possible child and family. So I'm really grateful that we're thinking about this. They are our frontline servers and returners. Obviously, the biggest job for this is parents. But when children are in other kinds of programs, they need to have that frontline person who is a skilled server and returner. He or she, more likely, needs to be very skilled at that. And they won't if they're not well. We need to think about this contingent responsivity. If we want a person to respond to every little 2-year-old who asks a really silly question, if we want to be able to have someone respond to 2 4-year-olds who clearly have different opinions about whose toy that should be, we want to have people who are skilled at having the conversations and interactions with children that can promote their well-being. This contingent responsivity is in relationships. We are in the relationship business. It is what we do with home visitors and families, with teachers and children, with administrators and professionals. And this idea of continuous contingent responsivity, every interaction being important for the developing child is key, and for families. We need well-compensated professionals. I'm going to keep saying it. And someday it might happen. But we've documented that the workers are extraordinarily undercompensated. And in fact, Head Start specifically was called out by Marcy Whitebook and Deb Phillips and Carol Lee Howes, saying that in the context of having to increase the number of Head Start teachers that had degrees, they met the goal. They raised their level of degrees. However, their compensation fell in comparable dollars during the same time period. We have a couple programs. I talked a little bit about these at lunch, but I think we need to talk about them more. These programs were developed in North Carolina. They are based in a model of leveraging teachers' professional development and learning and credit certification with compensation, with scholarships for the actual schooling and work, and wages as appropriate. These two are models where we can actually start to lift early childhood professionals, and I'd like to see them used more broadly. We've got models for what competent, healthy professionals look like. We are starting to use them. We're delivering them in the context of coaching, motivational interviewing, lots of different kinds of support. I like Tish Jennings and Mark Greenberg's model because it starts with the teacher's well-being at the beginning, then thinks about her skills, the classroom climate, and student outcomes. The idea that it's the base for how all of this learning and education and these needles we're going to move is going to happen. The National Academy of Sciences has another idea and way of looking at it. They talk about transforming the need. It's almost a siren call for us to transform the competencies of the early childhood workforce who are going to be doing all this work we need, especially with children and families who live in poverty. And if you take a look at their model, it's beautifully fleshed out and wonderful. And the well-being of the practitioner falls after a bunch of professional development, which is okay. Maybe we don't need to worry about it till there, but it certainly influences her behaviors and actions and then relationships and child outcomes. An interesting thing that really is a gap in our research right now is that in this document, they dedicate a very small amount of attention to the well-being of the practitioner. We actually don't know what it means. I mean, we know what it means to be well as a person, but we don't know exactly how to get that in the context of working in these very high demands, low rewards professions. The next promising approach is to think about the workplaces in which we serve children and families. Sandy Bloom has a model called Sanctuary, and it grew out of working in the healthcare professions and then service professions, in which she noticed that the delivery systems which were helping children and families, in her case patients, were as traumatized and suffering sometimes as the patients and families and people receiving the services. And so she uses a systems-based approach to think about enhancing the safeness and well workplaces in which we work. I'm working with a colleague, Bob Whitaker, and we're developing a grant for a funder in which we're going to look at PreK teachers' well-being, compare it, look at how it's doing with their classroom quality, and then how that's going with the workplaces in which they're delivering services. And Sandy is helping us think about adopting her model for early childhood settings. Finally, we've got at the community level some really exciting ways to start thinking about implementing and enacting the programs we know that move the needle, the programs that we know that work. One way is a collective impact model, which involves organizations, cross-sector. In the global research, I'm reading a lot about intersectoral work, right? So different sectors of service working together to look at a specific social problem, common mission agenda, and aligning their efforts. So we can think about planning programs across sectors instead of lots of little programs in isolation. Systems approaches, collective impact has some promise for communities doing this. Some examples in our own community. First 2,000 Days project, really looking at gathering a community around children's early experiences and the importance. North Carolina's Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge is a great example of how one might try to integrate systems change and implementation science and transform the systems that are delivered to families. The East Durham Children's Initiative is another, using a systems-based approach to think about how can we create the systems and integrate the early childhood and family systems that we need in Durham. Family Success Alliance is an Orange County early initiative. Ready for School, Ready for Life is Guilford counties. And Reed Charlotte is one systems-based initiative that is looking at moving the needle on reading among children in Charlotte. So we have these new approaches toward implementing and using. Come on, there we go. And we also have implementation science. So when we've got a program that works, we've got something that we know how to use, and the issue is how to get it up to scale. We can use implementation science to take these effective tools we know that work. We can implement them in the context of contexts which are supportive, going back to some of that systems work and creating a community collaborative around it to have socially significant outcomes, to make a difference, to move the needle for children and families. That looks fun. In some transformative early childhood programs, when they're done well, when early childhood programs are done well, they can transform lives, especially if they maintain their focus on public health, families, and a whole child approach. This is really important. I really think this public health piece is something we don't want to lose. If we see a day when public schools educate children down to birth, I really hope that those early years are informed by a comprehensive public health-based approach where we're thinking about the whole child, nutrition, health, families. We want to emphasize interactions, instructions, program quality, and well professionals. And it's worth it to explore new economic ways of explaining what we do and implementation and systems-based approaches to make sure that these great things we develop are getting used. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the many people who helped me with all the great ideas and information, and